let's get on to the fun bit and look at the four prime ministers that you write about in your book. You served under three, but one of the four then went on to become prime minister. So if I was asked on the basis of your book to rank them in terms of who you least despised up to who you most despised, I'm guessing that the one you least despise is Theresa May, who you seem to quite admire.
Oh, I like Theresa May. Yeah, no, I think least despise is cruel. I really did like Theresa May. Yeah,
because you were going out to bat for her solution to Brexit, weren't you?
Yeah. This is famously a very great batsman, so I'm very flattered when he talks about batting.
Yes.
No, I really like Theresa May. She I thought, was genuinely dignified, genuinely honourable. She was somebody who, unusually in a politician, had a private side. A lot of other politicians, there's a great line of W.H. Auden. He says, a private face in a public space is better than a public face in a private space. And politicians, there's a lot of public face in a private space. And Theresa May was a real person. And she was serious, and she worked unbelievably hard. And I think she genuinely, towards the end, was really trying to reach a compromise, trying to get a soft Brexit through. A lot of things went wrong in the early days. I think she said things that she shouldn't have said, but I think she was trying genuinely to reach out to Labour, reach out to Jeremy Corbyn. She could see that if she didn't get a soft Brexit through, Boris Johnson would produce a much worse, harder Brexit, and she needed to prevent that. And I do, of all those prime ministers, she's the one that I liked most and admire most to this day.
I mean, relatively admire, I guess. And then Cameron, David Cameron, your portrait of him is quite a feline one. And also of George Osborne, whom you very memorably describe as being like an 18th century French cardinal. But Cameron, I mean, he's an Etonian, and you're an Etonian. So, is he a type that you recognise from Eton, or?
I found David Cameron difficult. It was strange. I mean, I got the distinct impression he didn't want me to be an MP. In fact, I was told by a member of the party that he'd said, Rory Stewart is the last person that we want in the House of Commons.
So why was it this? You'd had some bust up in the war game, or what had happened?
I think it's partly because he'd come to Afghanistan, and when I was still living in Afghanistan, and I had been very, very critical of what we were doing in Afghanistan, and I'd been quite aggressive with him when he was trying to talk up what the British troops were doing in Helmand. I said, look, he said, I think everybody here can agree that at least, the British troops are doing a great job in Helmand. And I said, you're not listening to us. We are telling you that the Taliban control Helmand, that nothing that they're doing is going to make any sustainable difference, that we've lost control of the borders, that the Afghan government's lost credibility, that you should not be putting 10,000 troops into that province. And I don't know whether it was my tone or my attitude, but something really, I think, angered him. I don't know. Probably, if you were to ask him, he'd probably say, "Actually, I barely remember Rory Stewart, and I don't know why he's flattering himself." I think
he'll be well aware of you now, Rory. I mean, I guess you're fouling his catchphrases and his kind of punchlines that he's delivering, which it also seems to be the case with Liz Truss, who you work with. Obviously she wasn't Prime Minister when you were an MP, but she was head of department.
She was my boss, yeah.
She was your boss.
Yeah.
And
I was very lucky. I had Liz Truss, Priti Patel, and Boris Johnson as my bosses.
Right, so Liz Truss memorably says to you, never be interesting. Which is obviously a bit late in your case, isn't it? What did she mean by that?
So she believes that politics is about having a line which you've prepared and repeating it. So she was famous for being able to say, the long-term economic plan is working 50 or 60 times a day. And she felt that my great flaw as a politician was that I tried to answer questions and that I would be perpetually getting myself in trouble. But she was also a really remarkable person. I mean, I saw when she was the Secretary of State a lot of what she was going to do as Prime Minister, because she had this incredibly erratic way of jumping on an idea very, very quickly and then abandoning it equally quickly. So I remember going to see her one day, it's in the book, and she says, I was the minister in charge of national parks, and she said, "Rory, thank you for coming to see me. I would like you to cut the budgets of the national parks by 20%. So I said, Secretary of State, their budgets are very small. That's going to do a lot of damage. I really don't think that's a good idea. She said, "Okay, for you, Rory, 5%. So I said, Secretary of State, if you're only going to cut them by 5%, I mean, it's hardly worth having the fight with the public at all. I suggest you don't cut them at all. So she said, "Okay, Rory, for you, we won't cut them at all." And I'm literally left there thinking, what was this conversation?
So she'd be number two, meaning that the political figure who becomes Prime Minister, who you regard as...
I think Liz Truss is... she is, as I've just described her. Boris Johnson, though, I think is at a different level. I mean, I think he's genuinely... he was a bad person. I mean, I think he eroded a lot of things that were quite precious about Britain and the British Constitution. One of the things that's strange about the new right is that it's not really conservative anymore. I mean, in my sense of it, I became a conservative because I thought the point about conservatives is they were meant to be standing up for traditions, standing up for the Constitution, respecting the past, believing in slow change, being prudent, being cautious, standing up for small farmers in Cumbria. These are the kind of things that I thought it was about. And not just in Britain, but all the way around the world, the new right has given up on being conservative. They've become radicals. They take incredible risks. They're ripping up international treaties, and they are challenging the Constitution. I mean, this guy lied to the Queen, prorogued Parliament, threw people out of his own party, broke the ministerial code, and then tried to change the ministerial code so he wouldn't have to resign for breaking the ministerial code, attacked the Supreme Court, slandered parliamentary committees, showed such total disrespect for the rule of law, for the civil service, for decency, for any of the things that hold us together. And he dared to sort of present himself as though he were a conservative.
I wonder whether you feel there might be any truth to the idea that you describing him is a bit like Dr. Jekyll describing Mr. Hyde. That there are elements in which your antipathy is heightened by the sense that there are certain commonalities there. So you both went to Eton.
This is my hairstyle. That's why.
You're both very, very, to a degree that's unusual, you're both very inspired by classical exemplars. So Boris famously by Pericles, you by Alexander the Great and Cato the Younger. And you both actually have an incredible ability to reach the parts that other politicians can't. So the question that I asked you right at the beginning, I mean, I'm guessing that the only other Tory cabinet minister and politician who would be able to fill up a space as large as this would be Boris Johnson. Do you see him kind of as your bad shadow? Or am I over-psychologizing there?
No, I think there's something in that. I think there is something in that. I think I feel the anger against him very, very intimately because I feel he is betraying a lot of the things that I care about. I mean, he is a complete...
He's a complete... The Barbican hangs.
The Barbican hangs. No, I mean, he's a disgrace to everything that I care about. But, I mean, if we just take... So Tom is a distinguished classical historian. He knows much more about this stuff than Boris Johnson or I know about the classical world. But one of the things that really annoys me is that he presents himself as somehow, venerating the Romans. I think the Romans would have completely despised him, right? totally lacking in dignity, gravity, seriousness, their sense of patriotism. I mean, if he'd been a Roman, he would have been, I don't know, some sort of strange stage actor or
Nero.
Kind of Nero or Catullus. I don't know what he was, but whatever he was, he's not Caesar, is he?
No, he's not Caesar, but he might be Nero.
Nor is he. One of my colleagues was like, one of my colleagues trying to defend him was like, yes, it's such, Boris Johnson. He retired like Achilles to brood in his tent. It's such a tragedy. He's not Achilles, right?
So...
No, he's really not. He's not.
So, Rory, you were a Tory MP. You served under these men and women. A decade of service. Would you see that decade as a time of triumph, or do you think that actually would Britain have been better off electing Labour in 2010? Do you think?
I mean, I think it was very, very bad. I'm not sure
what was bad.
That whole period in office. I think part of the problem was that David Cameron was part of a sort of Blairite consensus in a way. He was a politician who presented himself as the heir to Tony Blair. He wanted to do politics in the centre. And I think he didn't see how much the world was changing. He didn't see how the 2008 financial crisis had destroyed the kind of economic policies that he was pursuing. He was still talking about Iraq and Afghanistan as though it was Bosnia and Kosovo in the late 90s. So that was one type of problem. And I'm not sure that actually Ed Miliband or Ed Balls would have been very different. I think they also were very much still trying to replay the 90s. I think where things got very, very bad is post-Brexit. I mean, I think that's when things got out of control in a way that's unimaginable. I have some sympathies for the way in which people tried to deal with the financial crisis. I think there were things that were very wrong about austerity, but I also think it's true that there was a financial crisis. I mean, it's not, I don't buy into the narrative that my friend Alistair sometimes produces, that the whole thing was fine, that there was no reason to cut government spending. I think that Labour would have done a similar thing. And what really went wrong was that the country was not prepared, politics was not prepared for 2015-16, wasn't prepared for populism, wasn't prepared for social media, wasn't prepared for Farage, wasn't prepared for Dominic Cummings, ultimately wasn't prepared for the monstrosity of that prancing elephant, Boris Johnson.
But as far as I can tell from the book, and also from listening to you on The Rest is Politics, you yourself would identify to a degree with the centrist traditions that David Cameron and maybe even Ed Balls were identifying with in 2010. So where does Britain go? Because if the extremes of left and right are false turnings, isn't the centrist tradition also complicit in the mess?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the billion-dollar question. It's very tempting to think that the answer to Boris Johnson and that style of politics is to go back to the 90s. It isn't. It isn't, because there was a lot wrong with that. And you can see that with Iraq. The Iraq War was an example of not just an illegal invasion, but a whole way of thinking about the world that was insane and brutal and ignorant. I think that our economic policies leading up to the financial crisis were far too narrow, excluded far too many things. So the only real way now of creating a new future has to be to have new ideas, to acknowledge that we failed in the past, that people like me were complicit in that failure, that I, from 2010 to 2016, as much as David Cameron, did not see how much the world was changing. And our mission now has to be to lay out what those things are, what those better things are. And economic policy is central to that. And we can talk a bit about that maybe when we come back from the break. The way that we think about democracy has to change. The way we think about international relations has to change. And the challenge for politicians at the center, and politicians like Keir Starmer, who gravitate towards that, is to stop being in a defensive crouch and get out there and produce some new ideas that acknowledge how we failed in the past.
Okay, we were meant to be stopping at 8:15, but I think we were 8 minutes late starting, so I'm just going to, if there's anxious faces backstage, I apologise. I'm just going to ask Rory 2 more questions. So I noticed that in that, you talked about our responsibility, our duty. I mean, what do you mean by our? You and Alistair? Because I was listening to The Rest is Politics yesterday, produced by that excellent company, Goalhanger, which I highly recommend, all their podcasts. On that, you were talking about how this incredible platform that The Rest is Politics has given you, I mean, much more of a bully pulpit than presumably you ever had as an MP or even as a cabinet minister, that maybe you might start to use that to sketch out, a manifesto? I mean...
Yes, I think at the very least, I mean, regardless of anything else, we need to start sketching out ideas. It's a fantastic opportunity to talk about ideas and to take risk in a way that politicians can't. So I'd like to see us talking about what an industrial strategy could look like, what government investments could look like, and what health reform could look like. And be unpopular, be a little bit more unpopular than a politician is allowed to be, and get things wrong. I mean, I think one of the lovely things about this kind of event, this kind of conversation, or the podcast, is that I obviously don't know about a lot of these things. To try out ideas and be prepared to say, okay, I got that wrong. And one of the lovely things, I think, is the feedback. I think we've got to harness people more in a way that politicians often struggle to do, because they feel very nervous about harnessing people. But there is obviously so much wisdom. There are 2,500 people in the room who, by definition, know in so much depth about so many things I don't understand. There will be in this room, I'm sure, doctors who obviously know far more about how to reform the health service than I'm ever going to know. There will be teachers who know far more about the education system I'm ever going to know. And one of the tricks, I think, in a population that is as educated, is as motivated, is to work out how we harness that rather than shying away from it.
And what do you see your role in this process as being? I mean, who is doing this conversation? Are you content with being a podcaster, or do you have dreams of being, I don't know, General de Gaulle coming back from Colombey des Églises and saving your nation? I mean, what are your ambitions?
I've been compared to a lot of things, but General de Gaulle, I love that.
It's what we all dream of being, secretly.
Kippy on my head. No, the honest truth is I've spent one night in my London house. I just got back from Jordan. My house is full of packing cases. My kids are about to start at a new school. I'm running an international charity. I'm flying halfway around the world. I need to settle down. I am not about to run in the next election.